A total team effort as Houston dismantles the Cincinnati Bearcats and wins 76-54. So what's next?
You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs, the daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Coogs your first listen of the day, making Locked On Coogs podcast network. Yes, actually, first listen to the post game, first listen the next morning, first listen anywhere in between. Locked On Sports Podcast Network, the number one sports podcast network in the world because of you. In the comments down below, tell us in this live post-game episode what you thought about that one with Cincinnati, what you thought about other college basketball scores across the country, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, maybe across the state. And we'll get into more and all of that over the course of today. I want to talk in the first segment talking about the balance in this game. I want to talk about different guys and names and give nightcaps and celebrate a lot of great performances. But man, oh man, what a great way to start the weekend Saturday morning with a big win over. Look, I don't want to blow up Cincinnati to be a rival, but a team you've seen a whole heck of a lot before. Today's show is brought to you by Brothers over at FanDuel. Best place to get in the action next weekend when football season wraps up. We got more on that fun later. Houston, 76, Cincinnati, 54. And I'm got to be honest, I said this before, and I'll say it again about Houston games, I'm sure. If you were to look at this game in a macro aggregate level, I don't know that it felt like it was a 20-point close game. It felt much more like the 30-point lead Houston had for stretches of the second half. Houston, at some point, it felt like kind of broke the will of Cincinnati. Cincinnati had 19 turnovers. Houston had 26 points off of those turnovers. And when you factor in how many of those turnovers were like not live ball turnovers, like just throwing the ball out of bounds, bad travel calls because you're flustered. Houston really maximized a lot of those opportunities. Houston was able to only send Cincinnati to the free throw line 13 times. I should stress, like, Cincinnati shot the three-pointer well, 43% from behind the arc. They shot decently given Houston's defensive pressure, I would say, from inside the arc as well. Generally speaking, though, this was just the kind of game where Houston did what they wanted to defensively and flustered Cincinnati to a point where they couldn't get things going. For reference to that 19 turnover mark Cincinnati had, they had just 11 assists. That's not a great ratio for the folks at home trying to keep track of things analytically or whatever, so to speak. Right now, offensively, Houston started slow, took 4.5 minutes to score their first points, but ultimately finished with 76. So once things got rolling, as you can tell here, things really got rolling in a big kind of way. And it felt like Houston's defense was never going to let them lose this game. That felt that way early on, right? There was no doubt in my mind about all of that. It did, however, feel like at various points you might have an offensive, struggling kind of day. It's 11 a.m. You're coming off of a road trip and you got a big game Wednesday night, and there was maybe a game you didn't circle on your calendar at the start of the year as a big one, but certainly feels like a big one now and all of that, right? So that's all, I think, fine and dandy, but truthfully, they were able to focus in and dial things in. And we're going to at some point give credit to all three impact freshmen in this one, I'm sure. Kingston and Isaiah played very well and deserved their flowers. Kingston had moments where he felt more like a freshman than he has in the past, I guess, but all things considered, I thought played pretty well in a lot of spots. But Chris Cenac in the first half of this game had 13 points and 3 rebounds, and really, I think, changed the flow of the game and changed the format of the game. Early on, it was like Cincinnati was trying to cut off the rim, stop penetration, run the guards off the line. And to do all of that, they kept losing Cenac out behind the three-point line. Now, Chris finished with just those 13 points and 3 rebounds. The second half, he didn't get a whole lot of minutes and didn't get a whole lot of run. And honestly, other guys had their shine and their moments. But that first half was such a difference maker. He stretched the floor and flipped the floor, and it did not feel like Cincinnati was able to keep up with him. 3 of 6 from behind the arc, but he was at 3 of 4 at one point. Really, really had Cincinnati spinning. They could not keep up with him. In the same forward spot, one of the big reasons he didn't play a lot in the second half was because bluntly, Ramon Walker came in and had a really strong second half at that power forward spot, doing a great job of covering Baba Miller, the lead man in a lot of ways of the Cincinnati offense, scoring 14 points a game and came in hot at a couple of games in conference lately. With Ramon Walker leading the way defensively, Houston able to hold Baba to just 2 points. He had 8 rebounds. He's a big 6'11 forward, but ultimately he was frustrated. The visible bottom. I like talking like body language and those qualitative kind of things. A lot of times you saw the frustration hit Baba in this game, and that was in large part to what you saw out of Ramon's effort in the second half. Now Chris was a big part of that in the first half too. It's not obviously just those guys, but I really felt like you kind of just it was this constant evolving thing. Houston had 4 guys with 13 or more points, another 3 guys with 7 points apiece. You had Mercy Miller get on the action and take advantage of Chase McCarty being hurt. He maximized his 18 minutes. I thought Isaiah Harwell played phenomenally well in his 17 minutes. Khalifa Sacco played as well as he's played in a long time in his 14 minutes. These guys just all found ways to impact the game. And I really, people are commenting in the chat right now. It felt like at some point Cincinnati knew there was just no formula for them to win this one, and we've talked in the preseason, offseason stuff about how Wes Miller may be on the way out there, and how there is like a history of basketball with the Cincinnati program, and there was once upon a time where they were this Kenyon Martin building 25 years ago kind of tremendous deal. This is not that. As much as the uniforms look the same, this is not that. And I guess they did get a lot out of Celestine, who is an awkward matchup at a 6'7" wing kind of spot, and he gave us 15 points. And I had one commenter in the subtext, the Everyday All Access subtext, where they're talking to me back and forth, mentioning that who's this Keyshawn Tillery guy? He had 14 points off the bench for Cincinnati. Those are the only 2 guys in double figures, and bluntly, they were the only 2 guys close to over double figures. Cincinnati didn't have anyone they could fall to offensively, anyone finding offense in any other spot, and it kind of felt like both those guys fell into some of the points that they got along the way. This was just a dominant effort from start to finish. It was intentional on defense. They were clearly rotating guys to the ball and sliding off and tagging the roller. I mentioned several times in my Twitter live thread where I'm going through and like play by play on the tweets throughout the game. Not quite play by play, but thought by thought, I guess is probably the better way to put it. Like there were times where Houston forced a turnover because they tagged the roller and then jumped back to the passing lane, and Cincinnati got caught in the air and just threw the ball out of bounds. And just several times where Houston's operating speed, Houston's operating intensity, it just was too much for Cincinnati. And it'd been a few games since we've seen this. Obviously, Texas Tech last weekend, just a week ago at this point, literally tipped off a week ago and a week and 45 minutes ago. That's a very different opponent, right? That's a strong opponent and all that. I look at this though, and like I think about, okay, obviously opponent difference being opponent difference. This game was so crisp and clean in a way that like TCU on Wednesday night was not. And I would point out to you, I think TCU and Cincinnati are similar in a couple other spots. TCU is probably a little bit better, sure, but this I think felt like you're home, you're in your groove. There's no weirdness about getting into this one and all of that. Now, as I look at a couple other aspects of this game, I think that a handful of individuals deserve being shout out besides just Chris Cenac and his efforts. And so I want to talk about what those guys, I mean, Kingston Flemings, Milos Uzan played well in his new role. I thought Isaiah Harwell was as good off the bench as he's been all season in a great spot. Mercy came and did his thing. I'm going to get into all that and more in just 1 second. But first, today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at FanDuel because, look, this is the last call for football. We are at T minus, what is it, 8 days, one final Sunday, a week from tomorrow, one last kickoff, the final chance to get on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel's making sure you are right in the middle of the action. Special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing a favorite, riding with the underdog, building the same game parlay, this is a game everyone's been waiting for all year long. This is where predictions can turn into plays, stats can turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the season and make Super Bowl even more exciting. From the kickoff to the final whistle. If you're a new customer, you put down $5 and get $200 back in bonus bets if that bet hits. Make it count because after the Super Bowl, the season's over. So at FanDuel, last call for football at FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Parker Ainsworth, Locked on Cougs. Thank you for being Locked on Cougs, your first listen post game, first listen the next morning, or first listen anywhere in between. The Make Locked on Sports Podcast Network, the number one sports podcast network in the world. If you haven't already checked it out, I'm going to recommend checking out our Every Dayer Club. Now, this is a little bit more. If you want more than the typical Locked on Cougs experience, you can get everyday access to ad-free audio, members-only Discord server, all access episodes of Locked on Cougs, one-on-one texting with me. There's a merch store. You get a discount there. All kinds of really cool opportunities if you just want a little bit more. So to lockedonpodcast.com/everyday to learn more. Or if you want to get on the action, go to lockedoncougs.supercast.com. The link is in the show notes. Now, I mentioned that I guess should probably point out that I mentioned that Everyday All Access people get to text me. A couple of them shot me questions during the game, and so we'll try and pull those up, work on to make sure that actually works correctly here in a second. But there were so many great performances in this one in Big 12, and frankly, in Big 12 play, that's having multiples in the game is awesome. I mentioned Chris Cenac. I want to talk about this back and forth. You had Milos Uzan and Kingston Flemings playing, I thought, pretty well off of one another. You didn't have the boisterous 25 points, certainly not the 42-point performance out of Kingston Flemings, but I thought they just looked much more in sync. It was much more your point, I'm point, you're off the ball, I'm off the ball. They seem to be working together. And bluntly, a lot of the times we've seen Kingston in the last 2 weeks get to those high point numbers, get to those 30 points, that 42-point game. It felt like he had the hot hand, certainly, but also things on offense weren't working. So it's, hey, let's get out of the way, get him the ball, right? That never happened in this one. So I don't look at his 7-point outing as being indicative of anything other than they didn't need him to take over things, right? Now, Milos is 16. That was a welcome sight. Milo was able to get downhill, be aggressive, get to the paint, and he missed 2 shots early and did not quit on it. He was 2 of 5 from behind the arc. He also had his 5 assists, which I would point out Kingston had 6 of his own. It's 11 assists between your 2 starting point guards there. That's pretty strong. I really thought that there was a stretch in the first half where Kingston sat. He had a bad turnover. He had a couple turnovers in the first half that were not pretty. He had a bad turnover. Coach pulled him, and Milos got to run point. And suddenly it looked like Milos was settled in. And this is the second game in a row, really the second half in a row. I guess the first half was because of the second half last game where that has happened for Milos. He's settled in with Kingston off the floor. I thought what's interesting about this one, and honestly, part of last one, is that confidence carried over to when Kingston came back on the floor. You saw a better version of Milos because of it. I'm not advocating for bringing Kingston off the bench. Don't get that twisted. I do think, though, that if he were like the first sub out for a short stretch in the first half, you might get more of this version of Milos because, man, when they're both being aggressive, Houston's really hard to cover. And while we're talking about being aggressive, the 2 guards off the bench, Isaiah Harwell, 17 minutes, 13 points, 3 rebounds, and a couple of other man-sized plays physically. And Mercer Miller came off the bench with 7 points in his 18 minutes. He also had 3 rebounds. Both guys, I thought, played really, really well. And in a comparative episode I did last week, looking at where this year's team was in January versus last year's national runner-up in January, one of the big discrepancies, obviously, the veteran leadership and the experience of Juwan Roberts and Chris Cenac, that tells itself, and whatever. A big deal, though, last year was like the first true guard off the bench because Terrence is more of a forward last year was Malik Wilson, right? And it's, can you piece together that kind of a strong rotational guy out of Chase McCarty, Isaiah Harwell. I think it's really more of Isaiah, and then Marcy Miller. And with Chase being hurt, it sounds like there's a sprain, not a break in his thumb. He did not see the action today. He might be, it sounds like a pain tolerance thing. So once the swelling's gone down and pain's gone down, he might be back Wednesday, he might be back next weekend. We'll see. You saw a lot of that happen out of Mercy and Isaiah, I think, today, filling up that role. And look, if you're going to get 20 points out of them, I think it's safe to say it's a pretty solid bench guy coming in. Both guys made great plays defensively, but I do think what Isaiah did in a couple of different physical spots, given these are freshmen, and frankly, given how hard we've been on him at times when things did not go well, I think it's worth pointing out, like, that was a big time game from him, covering guys much bigger than him, fighting for rebounds, getting tip outs, getting tap. I mean, he got credited with 3 rebounds. We can count the tips and the taps. I think he gets a little bit more than that. Really, really impressed with Isaiah. Mercy came in and did Mercy things. So that Mercy was better than he has been defensively, but also still made a couple of rotational errors, found a 3-point shooter mid-shot that will ultimately, like Kelvin will say, hey, man, we got to keep working on this to get more minutes, right? And that'll all come. And I think that you saw steps forward for both guys today. I think that's the thing when we talk about comparing this year's team to last year's team in the episode last week. If you go check that out, we forget how much last year's team grew from the end of January to April 1st. And this team is actually in a very similar spot in January, but they've got to do the same kind of growing. This made me confident that that growing is possible. Now, those comments that did come in on the subtext, and again, everybody all access members get to go back and forth. It's awesome to get to talk to some of you. I mentioned this last week. One really heartwarming story from an Everyday All Access member about like having their wedding at the U of H chapel and how like that spurs as like lifelong fandom. Cool to get to talk to people at that much more of a personal level, but question came in about Cenac in the first versus the second half. And honestly, I think this was twofold. One, he had a great first half. I don't think it's realistic to think he's going to get 26 just because he had 13 in the first half. That's just the game flows and ebbs and changes and things like that. He also had a lot more minutes in the first half. Houston opted to go with one big on the floor for a lot of the second half. And when Tugler is finally not in foul trouble and Sacco is playing well, that one big spot shrinks a little bit. I also think that this was because like a Ramon Walker came in and played really well in the second half defensively, just helped space you out. I think some of that was there too. I also think, frankly, like if it's not like the load managing or doing anything like that, but like why push it when things are working? You got another big game on Wednesday, and that game got a lot bigger this morning, and we'll talk about why that is in a second. And so I'm not worried about it. I think, frankly, it's almost encouraging that after having a troublesome game in Lubbock, Chris has had 2 really strong first halves thus far. Right now, unlike Lubbock or Fort Worth, Houston had trouble scoring in the first 4 minutes of this game. Those 2 games actually previously, Houston came out hot. This one, it came out a little cold, but in both games last Wednesday and today, Chris is a big part of getting the offense going early and kind of change what Cincinnati is able to do defensively. Another subtext question that came in was about if McCarty can get his minutes back based on how the bench played. And truthfully, I think it will be interesting to see with how long. We don't know how long McCarty's going to be out. I don't know if it'll even be that long. When it's a pain tolerance thing and you have that tough a kid, I almost wonder if it's not going to be all that long, frankly. But if it is, regardless of what it is, I should point out that I do think that he will get minutes because he's a sharpshooter from behind the arc. He's a little bit bigger body. Now, where his minutes come back to him from might change. Like 24 hours ago, I had told you they were coming out of Mercy's pocket. Today, I don't know if that's necessarily where they come from, right? Wednesday, it might feel different. It could also be matchup dependent, right? When Tiam went down hurt for Cincinnati in this game, Houston was able to play a little bit smaller. If they're playing a opponent with 2 true bigs, they might not be able to play Mercy quite as many minutes against a true 2 big lineup and stuff like that. So we'll see where things go throughout those. But I don't think they missed him today. Wednesday, they might. We'll get into that in the Nightcap segment in just one second. Before we get to that,
hi, everyone. I'm Kalia Butler, host of Locked On Women's Basketball, and this is Mazda's Women's Basketball Snapshot, celebrating the work no highlight reel can ever capture. The WNBA has released its 2026 schedule featuring a 44-game regular season beginning on Friday, May 8th. The league's historic 30th season includes expansion teams Portland Fire and the Toronto Tempo, with opening weekend highlights such as Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever hosting Paige Beckers and the Dallas Wings, and a rematch of the 2025 finals between the Aces and the Mercury. In college hoops, South Carolina handed Vanderbilt its first loss of the season with a dominant 103-74 win. These moments are earned off the clock, those long before the lights ever come on. The sweat, the fakes, the doubt, the scrapes, and coming back for more every time. Mazda puts the same drive into every detail. Wins define the moment. Putting in the work, that defines you. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you.
Parker Ainsworth locked on Coogs here, and it does sound like Kelvin Sampson's officially now in the Hall of Honor, and so I want to make sure we give him that praise. I'm trying to figure out exactly what if there was some reason that came out today or not was what I was on my phone checking just now. But congratulations, I think that's both a yeah duh and an obvious kind of thing. But I guess the formality of it is nice to officially have happen. But Houston knocks off Cincinnati 76-54, and Nightcaps are going to go out. I think Mercy Miller deserves one. He took advantage of the opportunity. Isaiah Harwell deserves one, took advantage of the opportunity. Someone got in both those guys' ear. I think it's very, very clearly. I think my guess is as to who on the staff, Kellen, Casey, whoever, and so like, hey, like if you want more minutes, if Chase is in street close today, now is the time to go earn it. I think they both were fighting for that tooth and nail. And we mentioned Chris Cenac in the first half. Tugler probably needs one for staying foul free because that's hard to see him doing. I thought Uzan was in great attack mode. We hadn't even talked about like Emmanuel was, only 1 of 7 behind the arc and still ended up with 13 points that were outside of missing a couple of threes he normally makes. Pretty efficient. I think that this team only having 4 committed turnovers between the guys on the floor, their team turnovers are a little bit different, but that's pretty impressive in and of itself. This is a really strong outing for the Cougs. And look, it's hard to check boxes of things that they need to go back and fix. Then you shoot the ball a little bit better, maybe start a little bit earlier, maybe. Roman still finished up with 76 points, some of that becoming the defense turned to offense. The deal now is you turn your sights a little bit to UCF, and Nightcap of sorts has to go to UCF, who knocked off Texas Tech this morning, 88-80. I had to double check that when I got sent that text at some point right before we went live here, but that was the score, 88-80 in Orlando. Orlando's a tough place to play. Houston knows as well as anyone. You remember Houston only won that game in Orlando last year at the buzzer, right? And so that when you think about like how great last year's team was, some of those like close wins against teams that were like, why are we so close here? Maybe go under the radar a little bit. But really, like this game, it was interesting to see in that you don't expect Tech to fall quite like that very often. Even UCF is 17-4 and did start the season pretty hot. I want to make sure I get this statistic correct, but I believe they ratted off a bunch of them. They lost their second game of the year to Vanderbilt and did not lose a game again until after Big 12 play had started to Oklahoma State, right? So, like, they went a long stretch in the non-conference, beating Pitt, beating A&M, right? This is a team with some talent. They kept a relatively close game with Arizona. Like, they're good. Houston gets them Wednesday night, and I think we'll be interested to see about Houston and in Central Florida Wednesday night after a game like this one will be kind of honestly like, look, they're coming to your place. Houston plays really well at Fertitta, and that should be in their favor. We also know that UCF would have every reason to be like riding a little bit high off the win they just had or whatever, and I don't anticipate them necessarily like succumbing to anything quite like that. But I do think what you'll see here is like some of these trends where you see Isaiah being hyper physical in the second half and doing really well there. Milos and Kingston doing more sharing of the basketball and sharing of the point guard duties. I think you may see that more often. Chris Semaine has played really well since seeing JT Toppin a week ago. Where do these trends head? If we head to Cincinnati, head to play UCF, and they stick and they stay, then All right. Maybe as Mr. Big Texco here points out, this is the way Milos is turning it around, right? Maybe this is the kind of thing that we've got going. Maybe Mercy does deserve those minutes going forward because he can get 7 points in his 17 minutes or whatever. Kind of can he fill those kind of things in more often? If you kind of have a little bit of a reversion back, as okay, like we understand we can do the things we did against Central Florida, or we did against Cincinnati. We understand we can do it, the things against TCU. We just have to continue to work towards getting them done against stronger and stronger and stronger opponents. Now, full disclosure, the Big 12 is going to give you those stronger opponents because you got UCF on Wednesday, and then you're at BYU Saturday night, and one of the toughest places to play in this conference, one of the toughest teams in this conference. You then, in the middle of February, have a stretch you go at Iowa State, hosting Arizona, at Kansas, in what is as tough a 9-day stretch, or what is that, tough of a week, I really should say, as you can get in America. And so how do you handle that as well? You're going to get those opportunities. What I'm looking for before all of that, though, is these positives we've seen post Texas Tech loss. You saw them against TCU. You saw them on more display against Cincinnati today. If you can carry those over, getting Cenac involved early, sharing those responsibilities with Kingston, getting with Kingston and Milos, getting that bench impact, whether it's Isaiah or Mercy, or like today it was both, right? Can you see those things play into a bigger opponent, a more talented opponent? And frankly, look, you went 1-1 with Texas Tech, and that's the best opponent you've got this year. You beat them by 4 at home. You lost by 4 on the road. I don't mean to say that's a wash or anything like that, but it does in some ways feel like if you knock off UCF Wednesday and keep on building, that probably does get looked at a little bit differently than if you kind of continue to stay on a steady ship here. Now, we'll be back Monday morning with more basketball talk, and there'll be football stuff as well as things continue to unfold. I still am. I got to guess we're working on doing more of a reflection back to the transfer portal and looking ahead as spring ball's around the corner. All kinds of fun things in Houston Cougar land, to Houston Cougar world. So thank you for subscribing and being a listener every single day. Again, if you want to get in on the action as an everydayer member, that option is always there, but go to lockedonpodcast.com/everydayer to learn more about that. Houston knocks off Cincinnati 76-54 in a game that I said at the beginning. I'll say it again. I'll say throughout the week, I'm sure, did not feel 20 points close, felt a whole lot more like it was 30 points close. This basketball team is trending back upwards, and I think that some lessons from the loss last week may have helped them. As we get to UCF on Wednesday, we'll know a lot more for sure. Locked On Cougs is primarily Locked On Podcast Network, and that means your team, the Houston Cougars, every single day. Go Cougs.